Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 24th on cultural representation of trauma in Bharati Mukherjee's The Management of Grief. In this lecture, I will talk about how trauma, when one is faced with two different cultural practices, are healed and how they negotiate with illness, depression, and traumatic experiences across cultures. In this lecture, I will talk about the problem of shock, problem of discovering a trauma when a group of people, which are approximately 329, died in a plane crash, Air India flight 182, and the people who are killed and how this and their survivors, how they actually consider these traumatic experiences, how they deal with these traumatic experiences. So in this lecture, I will talk about the crash of Air India flight in 1885, which was bombed by Khalistani separatists. And the plane has begun from Montreal, Canada, and it has to land to Mumbai via London, Delhi, and then back to Mumbai. But when their family members found about the crash, and they had some kind of unnegotiable pain and suffering that led to their prolonged cultural difference, prolonged negotiation of traumatic experiences based upon cultural differences. This story also talks about the spiritual journey of the survivors and who have come to India to mourn, to heal their grief. And in this way, the story has cultural dimensions, the human touch, the loss of human touch. It deals with the loss of language and how language fails to represent trauma or how language portrays trauma. And then we have a return of Saila Bhave to Canada and her final vision and closure. I'll also talk briefly about the healing experiences which this story, The Management of Grief by Bharati Mukherjee provides. In this lecture, I'll talk about briefly that trauma is about psychological and emotional response to deeply distressing events, which in this case is the attack on Air India plane in 1985. And it reveals, the story reveals the fragmentation of identity, the fragmentation of the identity of people, the survivors, how their identity is split up between Canadian and Indian roots. To make it simpler, the people on board, total people were 339, and out of them 268 were Canadian citizens, but they had their Indian origin. In other words, they were Indian descendants and Canadian citizen. So how these people have the fragmentation of their identity, how these people, the members of the survivors of these people were having split up their identity, and how they were coping with their memory, the memory of this shock, the memory of this incident. And sometime when they have shock, such a terrible shock that they are not able to express anything and have maintained silence, a position of calmness, which most of them consider as that they are not too much affected by these traumatic experiences. Further, the story also talks about the narrator Sailabha struggle to narrate, to express, to represent her traumatic experiences. To go a little detail about the flight, the incident of bombing and the traumatic event. So the bombing occurred on 23rd June 1985. The flight was bound from Montreal to Mumbai with stops in London and Delhi. And on the way, before it could reach to Ireland, on the coast of Ireland, the flight was bombed and crashed. a number of people who died, but the story which gives attention to are the family of Saila Bhave, whose husband Bikram and her two sons were killed in the crash. Then Kusum, whose her husband and youngest daughter were also killed in this crash. Then there is a family called Ranganathan, a person called Ranganathan, whose entire family died in this crash. And most other people who died. The problem with this crash was that in the beginning it was seen as an Indian incident, because the people were basically from Indian origin, and some people saw that this was a Canadian incident, Canadian event, because the people who died, they were holding Canadian citizens. So there was a problem of recognizing this traumatic event, whether it is Indian or it is a Canadian. And also the members who died in this plane crash were from America, from UK and other countries. Total, I think there were people from 5 countries. So this has become a traumatic representation of not just one country but of 5 countries. And initially no one was willing to take or consider this as their own experiences. So the description and the plane bombing in this story is based upon real and historical event, and it largely focuses upon the loss of the family members of its protagonist Saila Bhave, the loss of the family of Ranganathan, the loss of the family of Kusum, and it tries to reveal or represent the idea of the crisis of unthinkability, or the crisis of representation, the crisis of failure to depict one's experiences which one has undergone. And when we look at the stories of the traumatic stories of Saila Bhave, Kusum and Ranganathan and many others, we find that this story depicts collective as well as individual trauma. It depicts the trauma of Indo-Canadian people, but moreover it depicts how trauma has become transnational. The reason for being transnational is that the people who died in this plane crash were from 5 different countries. Whether they are by birth or by holding citizenship, and it has also become translational because the people who are trying to console the members who died in this plane crash, they face the language of communication, because the language of healing, because their mother tongue initially was one of the Indian languages, and also it has certain kind of cultural differences. And one of its the character, her name is Judith Templeton, who tries to console the people, but she finds that she is unable to actually reach to the grief which the members which the survivors are suffering, and she needs someone who can actually convey, translate what she wants to say. They can translate her way of consoling, her medium of consoling, as well as her language of consolement. So this story has transnational as well as translational traumatic representation. Further, the story also talks about how the trauma of the survivors have made them mute. They have become emotionally numb. They have become detached with all kind of activities, all kind of daily activities. At one point, Saila Bhave says, while suppressing her grief, I am beyond anger, beyond pain, which doesn't mean that like she has no pain or no suffering. Rather, it means that her anger, her pain has become beyond expressions. And she finds later on that she has certain kind of hallucinations and visions of her dead husband in a Himalayan temple, who tells him that what they have begun together, she has to complete, she has to finish alone. And in this way, Saila Bhave finds herself to be living in two different worlds, and these worlds can be physical worlds, the Indian as well as the Canadian. It can be two different worlds of her internal feeling of pain and agony, as well as her outer appearance, where people find that she is calm and so she is not suffering much. So these two words represent the way like she feels pain and the way other people perceive her pain because of her apparent calmness, as well as it also represents the world, the cultural differences of the world of India and the world of Canada, and where they need different tactics, different means, different configurations of healing. When the discovery of plane was made that has been crashed, and then there were some like social workers. One of them is Canadian social worker, Judith, and she tries to actually work trying to help the members who the survivors, and then she actually meets Saila Bhave and finds that Bhave is calm by the shock, but she is perceived by government social worker Judith Templeton that she is coping very well and as a pillar of strength who may be able to help as an intermediary or an official Ontario Ministry of Citizenship terms, a cultural interpreter. So Judith wants Saila Bhave to become a kind of cultural interpreter because she can be a kind of intermediary between the white people. She can be intermediary between the Canadian means of healing. She can be intermediary for Judith Templeton and other members who are not from Canadian origin but are Canadian citizens. I may not be Canadian citizens as well. So in this way, Judith actually perceives that she is coping very well. She is a pillar of strength and she can work as a cultural interpreter. But Saila has a very terrible and very difficult time. She wants to say to Judith, but she is not able to say that I wish I could scream, starve, walk into Lake Ontario, jump from a bridge and say, I am a freak. This terrible calm will not go away. So the calm which she has on her appearance, but from inside she is literally and extremely disturbed. She wants to jump. She wants to commit suicide. She looks from inside she looks like a freak, but from outside she looks very calm and stable. Probably she is not shouting, she is suffering from inside. And Judith is someone who is not able to communicate with the survivors of the relatives. And once they visit to Ireland to identify the bodies of the people which have been recovered, but it has another level of trauma. And at this point, there are like social workers, there are people who want to actually console the people. They want to show some kind of benevolence on death. And at one point, Judith says, I have no experience with a tragedy of this scale. Judith says that like she has been working to console people at different levels, but she has never found this kind of tragedy. And then Saila says, then who could have? Everyone has not expected and experienced this kind of tragedy. And Judith says that the people who are there, the survivors who are there, they have become hysterical. They have become mad. This is like cultural differences that are like how people are grieving. But Judith finds them hysterical, mad, disturbed. When we think about the suffering which people have and the people who want to heal them, they find that they are facing a lot of cultural problems. They are finding there is a lot of social problems. The people from two different cultures are not able to understand what one is going through. At one point in the story, Judith, who is trying to help the survivors and trying to have some kind of consolation and benevolence on the death of their relatives, their near and dear ones. She tells, I have no experience with a tragedy of this scale. And to this Sala objection says that nobody has any kind of experience of this scale. But while having this conversation, Judith says that the relatives, the people who are there to find out the dead bodies of their relatives, they have become hysterical, they have become mad, they are behaving in a very bad way, in a very hysterical manner, in a mad way. And then Saila Bhave says, by the standard of the people you call hysterical, I am behaving very oddly and very badly, Miss Templeton. They would not see me as a model. I do not see myself as a model. Nothing I can do will make any difference. We must all grieve in our own way. To repeat, we must all grieve in our own way. So the people whom Judith finds hysterical, mad, and behaving in a very odd way, this is because of the cultural differences, the social differences, where people openly cry and where people actually reveal their sadness through their physical as well as mental different mental responses. So we have what to call the experience, the way of healing and the way of expressing where both body and mind are involved, and which for Judith is something very odd. And then Saila Bhave says that in this way everyone including she herself is hysterical, and if she is needing her help to actually console these people, then they would not find any kind of difference, and she cannot help them. Moreover, she also says that everyone must all grieve in their own way, which means uh, Saila Bhave is denying one institutionalized way of grieving, that one can grieve in a particular way, that there can be one particular justifiable and what you call legitimated way of expressing one's suffering. Rather, suffering and grieving is one's personal thing, and there can be no logic, no rules for this. And hence he says that everyone should have their own method of expressing griefs. So the cultural differences which are based upon traditional Indian mourning and Western psychological healing are causing some kind of problem between the healing method which Miss Templeton is trying to use and which most of the mourners are having. Moreover, when the bodies of some of the people are identified, for example, Kusum is able to identify the dead body of her husband as well as her youngest child, and she comes to India, performs some rituals, and these rituals are as a part of mourning, as a part of healing. And those who are not able to find the body of their relatives, their near and dear ones, they have their own way of healing, their own way of mourning, and it also has a lot of social and cultural differences. They do not actually focus completely on the psychological norms, Western psychological norms of healing. And it creates conflict between prescribed roles that one should actually act like a stoic widow. One can act like a supportive community member, which Ms. Templeton is doing, and one can have the act of expressing personal turmoil, and hence with that people have the people like who are suffering and the people like who are supporting, they have no relation to each other, rather they are doing it in a very mechanical way. But particularly in Indian context, this is not the way where both the supporters and the person who is grieving sometimes they unify themselves. The supporter also grieve the pain. They become one with the one who is suffering. And so in this way there are some kind of cultural dimensions, cultural differences, where every person have their own way of experiencing as well as expressing and healing the pain and suffering. And the trauma which these people found, these people have experienced, are undergoing, they are shaped by diasporic identity, diasporic cultures, and diasporic displacement. And this is the problem for Miss Judith Templeton, because her intercultural beliefs do not make her associated with Indians and Western community. Saila too has some issues with cultural differences, as he has internalized both both Canadian as well as Indian values, Indian methods. But she is trying to cope with this trauma in her own way. And somewhere in the story, then Judith finds like what she likes. She tells to Miss Bhave that one needs to have some kind of desire to help the people who are suffering, and one should have moral conscience for negotiating social knowledge or social differences of each individual. But moreover, the problem which she is facing is because she is not able to come at the level of cultural particularization and institutionalized expressions of concerns make her healing aspect difficult. Because what she is doing, since she is a part of NGO, she is a part of NGO which is helping other people to actually console themselves. So she has a set of norms, a set of institutionalized practices, expressions, and in a way she is performing her activities in a very mechanical way, and it is not working with other people who are suffering. And this is something which Judith realizes at one point. She tells Saila, while persuading her to help her to become her cultural interpreter, to become her supporter, she says, we have interpreters, but we don't always have human touch, or maybe the right human touch. So remember that in consolation, in healing, human touch and the right human touch are very important. Simply understanding one's problem, simply understanding one's culture and then able to get with them will not work. Rather, one needs to have one's association with the suffering of other people, and one has to be part of another person's suffering. One needs to express and have human touch, not something which is mechanical. And this is what is lacking with Judith. And the problem in this story is transcultural. It is transnational as well as translational, and hence the management of grief is not easy. It needs transcultural experiences. it needs trans-social experiences, it needs translational experiences at the level of language as well as culture, and different means of managing and healing grief with human touch or with right human touch. The suffering in this story are both internal as well as external. It is internal at the level of the people who are suffering and how they express it. It is external because of the involvement of different people from different cultures and the family members, how they perceive and how they try to manage it. For example, Saila Bhave is caught between Indian and Western mode of managing her grief, and she tries to pursue and follow the Indian method of rituals over her husband's death and son. And later on, her parents are trying to arrange her new marriage, considering that this new marriage will provide her some kind of healing. She will be busy within a new life. So her family members' involvement for her marriage is an external mode of healing, and what she is suffering is something internal. She says, "Save me, my parents are arranging a marriage for me." Many will accept because they cannot resist the call of custom. But why? Because many people think that the duty of man is to look after a wife, and since her husband has died, so she needs a male partner to look after her. And it is almost over 6 months. And then on the third day of the 6th month, she is in an abandoned temple in a teeny Himalayan village, and where she gets a vision that her husband comes to her dream and tells her two things: "You are beautiful and you must finish alone what we started together." And this is also a moment of her vision and realization. Then she is back to Canada, where she has gained something by coming to India, and this vision helps her to cope with her problem. The grief and suffering unites the people. It unites the different grieving members, and it also separates them, divides them out of their fear and suspicion, that their consolation will not last for a long time. She meets, Saila Bhave identifies and meets a Sikh couple, and who are also grieving over the death of their family members, and she wants to console them. But at the same time, she also finds that it is the people, the terrorists were from the same community, and how could then she console them? So there are certain things, so grief unites them, but something else divides them. And she wants to say something through Templeton to this couple. She wants to tell something to the couple directly, but she is not able to articulate a language. She finds that the articulation of her feelings are difficult, and then she tells herself, "How do I tell Judith Templeton? I cannot tell her. I want to add, I wonder, I want to say, I try to explain." So her sentences remain incomplete. She simply says, "I want to say something," but she is not able to say what she wanted to say. Here she has a loss of language because of her extreme traumatic experiences, because of the kind of drastic situation she is put into. And the loss of language is something which is most of the writers and critics, philosophers agree. When we think about the case of 9/11, There were a large number of people, thinkers, writers like Don DeLillo, Toni Morrison, John Updike, Ian McEwan, Martin Amis, philosophers like Habermas, Derrida, and many others. They believed that the experiences of 9/11 were unspeakable, unwritable, undescribable, and it is beyond language because language has failed to represent it. Similarly, the case of this crash of Air India is unspeakable, unwritable, and undescribable. The story reveals that the relationship with one's own language is problematized. When Saila finds the news of her husband's death, and she laments, "I never told him that she loved him." She says that she was so well brought up. Her bereaved friend Kusum says, "It's all right, he knew, my husband knew." They felt it. Modern young girl have to say it because they feel what they feel is fake, but their husbands know. So over here there is like a failure of language, what you have never said. It is also where certain things are communicated without the help of language, and one understands, and this is a cultural way of experiencing one's love, also a cultural way of experiencing and expressing the grief. Further, when we think about trauma and healing, in this story, we find that there are certain ways, certain methods which Bharati Mukherjee has suggested. She says that there is no turning away from grief and loss. One has to accept it and then rebuild. So acceptance is very necessary, and then one has to rebuild one's life. I quote her. This is an extract from her story. In the textbook of grief of management, she replies, "I am her confidant. I realize one of the few whose grief has not sprung bizarre obsessions. There are stages to pass through: rejection, depression, acceptance, and reconstruction." So like when one is suffering, one has to pass through rejection, depression, acceptance, and reconstruction. She has compiled a chart and finds that 6 months after the tragedy, none of us still reject reality. But only a handful are reconstructing. Depressed acceptance is the plateau we have reached. So they have accepted, but their acceptance has caused them depression. Remarriage is a major step in reconstruction. Those who could, those is a little surprised, even shocked, over how quickly some of the men have taken on new families. Selling one's house and changing jobs and cities is healthy. So she says like these are some of the things that where they have experienced the traumatic experiences. They can change the place, they can change the job, they can change the city. But this may not be possible for everyone. Those who have opportunities and skills may do, but not everyone. So the methods of healing which this story suggests, it is also an individual way of healing. This may not work with everyone. So what Mukherjee says that everyone must heal in their own way. As she says that everyone should actually grieve in their own way. So both grieving and healing have individual touch and individual means, individual ways. It cannot be one common universal pattern and formula which everyone can follow. So to conclude, the trauma in management of grief is both personal and collective. It is transnational, translational, and transcultural. And it needs a lot of efforts to actually cope with this kind of traumatic experiences, where people are having complex diasporic grief and diasporic identities. The story emphasizes the long-lasting, unresolved nature of traumatic loss, and where people suffer for a long time and if they accept, their acceptance is depressive acceptance. Thank you.